They never imagined that forcing Avery Cole to eat lunch alone for 3 straight weeks, while they whispered poison behind her back, would be the tactical mistake that cost them everything at Pine Valley High School for months. Brielle Carter and her glass crown had perfected their cruel social engineering, breaking spirit after spirit, until their victims transferred out in shame. But today, in the gleaming cafeteria, where hierarchy ruled with silent brutality, they were about to discover that the quiet girl they'd chosen to isolate had been hiding 16 years of military discipline, waiting for exactly this moment to turn their own weapons against them. Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're reading from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you're following, because the next parts will show you what happens when a predator mistakes silence for weakness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October morning mist still clung to the windows of the Cole family's temporary rental house when Avery's internal clock woke her at 05 for 5 hours, the same time it had every day since her father Marcus Cole had taught her that discipline begins before consciousness. The modest 2-bedroom house on Elm Street felt foreign after 17 military bases across 12 states, but it would have to serve as home base while her grandmother fought cancer at Pine Valley General Hospital. The reflection staring back at Avery from the bathroom mirror showed a 16-year-old girl who had learned to read rooms like tactical maps. Her dark hair fell in practical waves just past her shoulders, deliberately styled to avoid drawing attention. Her clothes, carefully selected from discount stores, were clean, pressed, and unremarkable. Everything about her appearance was calculated to help her observe without being observed, to gather intelligence while remaining invisible to potential threats. What that reflection couldn't show was the steel running through Avery's spine, forged by a childhood spent moving from base to base, watching her Navy SEAL father demonstrate that true strength wasn't about the loudest voice in the room, but the clearest mind under pressure. Her morning routine was precisely timed and methodically executed. 20 minutes for a shower using drugstore shampoo that left her hair clean but unremarkable. 15 minutes to dress in carefully planned dark jeans and a plain navy sweater that wouldn't show stains if someone accidentally spilled something on her. 10 minutes to prepare breakfast and pack a lunch from their sparse pantry. 5 minutes to review her class schedule and mentally rehearse the day's objectives. Blend and observe, adapt, survive. The walk to Pine Valley High School took exactly 26 minutes from their rental house, a route Avery had optimized during her first week to avoid the neighborhoods where her wealthiest classmates lived in mansions that cost more than most military families earned in a decade. She preferred the anonymity of busy sidewalks over the risk of encountering groups of students who might question why the new girl lived in temporary housing rather than generational wealth. The morning air carried the scent of privilege and old money that seemed to emanate from every perfectly manicured lawn and luxury vehicle that passed her by. Pine Valley High School rose before her like a monument to everything she had never been able to take for granted. The building itself was architectural perfection, with modern glass facades and sprawling grounds that spoke of a community where education was valued because resources were limitless. The student parking lot was filled with cars that cost more than her father's annual salary, driven by teenagers who viewed $60,000 vehicles as basic necessities rather than impossible dreams. Avery had learned to time her arrival precisely to avoid the morning social rituals that dominated the front entrance. Too early, and she'd encounter the athletes riving for sunrise workouts, their easy confidence and casual entitlement making her feel like an infiltrator behind enemy lines. Too late, and she'd have to navigate through clusters of friends reconnecting after their evening apart, their conversations filled with references to ski trips and shopping sprees that highlighted the vast economic gulf between their worlds. The hallways of Pine Valley High School were a carefully choreographed social ecosystem where every student knew their place in the invisible hierarchy. Avery had spent her first week studying these dynamics with the intensity of a reconnaissance mission, mapping the power structures and unspoken rules that governed daily interactions. She understood that her survival depended on remaining beneath the notice of those who held real authority in this environment. Her training had taught her that the most dangerous enemies were the ones who smiled while they planned your destruction. Her first class was advanced placement chemistry, where Avery consistently earned perfect scores, despite using a calculator she'd bought at a dollar store and taking notes in a composition notebook rather than the expensive tablets most students preferred. Dr. Martinez, the chemistry teacher, had quickly recognized Avery's exceptional aptitude and had begun providing additional challenges that pushed her understanding beyond the standard curriculum. These extra assignments were Avery's favorite part of each school day: moments when her intelligence could shine without social complications, when formulas and equations provided clear answers in a world where everything else seemed deliberately obscure. During chemistry class, Avery noticed the way other students reacted when Drive Martinez announced test scores or praised her understanding of complex concepts. Some showed genuine respect for her academic abilities, but others displayed the subtle resentment that successful scholarship students often encountered. She had learned to accept compliments quietly and avoid any behavior that might be interpreted as arrogance or superiority, knowing that her academic success was already making her a target for those who viewed intelligence as a threat to their inherited advantages. It was during her second week that Avery first became aware of Brielle Carter, not through introduction or conversation, but through careful observation of how other students responded to her presence. Brielle moved through the hallways like royalty, accepting the deference of her subjects as natural law. Her blonde hair caught light like spun gold, and her smile could freeze or warm depending on her assessment of your worth. To her social empire, she dressed in clothes that cost more than most families spent on groceries, her every accessory carefully chosen to communicate wealth, status, and untouchable privilege. What made Brielle truly dangerous wasn't her beauty or her money, but her intuitive understanding of social psychology. She knew exactly how to identify weakness and exploit it, how to turn friend against friend with carefully planted doubts, how to destroy reputations with strategically timed rumors. She ruled Pine Valley High School not through fear, but through a more sophisticated weapon: social annihilation, the complete erasure of your existence from the only world that mattered to teenagers. Avery watched Brielle's inner circle operate with military precision. Kenzie Monroe served as the enforcer, tall, athletic, and quick to turn verbal sparring into physical intimidation. Sierra Velez was the mouthpiece, sharp-tongued and venomous, capable of destroying someone's self-esteem with surgical precision. Maddox Grant lurked in the background, quiet and observant, collecting digital ammunition that could be weaponized at a moment's notice. They called themselves the Glass Crown, a name that perfectly captured their dual nature: beautiful and fragile, but capable of cutting deep when shattered. The cafeteria became Avery's primary observation post, a theater where the social dynamics of Pine Valley High School played out in full view. During lunch periods, she chose a table near the windows where she could observe without appearing to do so, watching as Brielle held court at the center of the room, her laugh carrying across conversations like a bell calling her subjects to attention. Other students orbited around her table, seeking approval or dreading dismissal, their body language revealing the invisible threads of power that connected every interaction. Avery ate her simple homemade sandwiches in calculated silence, studying the ebb and flow of teenage politics with the same intensity her father brought to analyzing enemy positions. She noted who sat where, who spoke first, who looked away when Brielle's attention shifted. She mapped the hierarchy of fear and favor that determined who belonged and who would be cast out. She understood that in this environment, knowledge was power and patience was survival. It was during her third week that Avery realized she had made a critical error in her assessment of the threat level. She had assumed that by remaining invisible she could avoid becoming a target, but she had underestimated the predatory instincts of those who ruled through domination. Brielle Carter had noticed her, not despite her efforts to blend in, but because of them. The new girl who didn't seek approval, didn't compete for attention, didn't display the desperate hunger for acceptance that marked most potential victims, was an anomaly that demanded investigation. The first probe came during English class when Mrs. Denby assigned group projects and Avery found herself deliberately excluded from forming teams. She waited patiently as students paired off until only she and two other social outcasts remained, then watched as Brielle approached their makeshift group with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, offering to let Avery join her prestigious team if she was willing to do all the research while receiving none of the credit. Avery politely declined, explaining that she preferred to work with students who valued collaboration over exploitation. The classroom fell silent as other students realized someone had just refused an offer from Pine Valley's reigning queen. That afternoon, Avery's locker had been tampered with, her combination somehow changed, forcing her to request help from the administration. To regain access, nothing was missing, but the message was clear: you have been noticed, you are being watched. Your sanctuary can be violated at any time. She changed her combination to her father's service number and began varying her routes between classes, understanding that the Cold War had officially begun. Walking home that evening, Avery reflected on the tactical situation she faced. Her opponents held superior numbers, controlled the terrain, and had the implicit support of an administration that preferred stability over justice. But they had also revealed their primary weakness: their need for public validation made them predictable. Their cruelty required an audience, which meant they were vulnerable to exposure. Their power depended on the silence of their victims, which meant truth could be weaponized against them. That night, over a dinner of military surplus MREs heated in their temporary kitchen, Avery mentioned the social dynamics at her new school. To her father, Marcus Cole listened with the patient attention he brought to all intelligence briefings, his weathered face revealing nothing as she described the hierarchy of privilege and persecution that ruled Pine Valley High School. When she finished, he nodded once and said something that would guide her through everything that followed: never mistake silence for surrender, sweetheart. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who watches and waits. They thought that spreading rumors about why the scholarship girl had really transferred to Pine Valley would break her spirit and force her to flee back to whatever trailer park she'd crawled out of. But they never imagined that Avery Cole had been trained since childhood to turn psychological warfare against those who wielded it carelessly. For 3 weeks, Brielle Carter and the Glass Crown had deployed every subtle weapon in their arsenal, from social isolation to digital harassment, believing they were slowly dismantling a helpless target. But today, behind the gymnasium, where they planned to film their final humiliation, they were about to discover that the quiet girl they'd been tormenting had been documenting every move they made, preparing to turn their own tactics into evidence of their downfall. The escalation began on a Monday morning when Avery arrived at her locker to find a printed photograph taped to the metal surface. The image showed her father in his Navy SEAL uniform, but someone had drawn devil horns and fangs on his face. With red marker underneath, someone had scrawled "Daddy Issues" in block letters, followed by a crude drawing that made her stomach clench with anger. She removed the photograph, carefully folding it and placing it in her backpack, where she had begun collecting evidence, knowing that documentation would be crucial when the time came to fight back. During second period biology, Avery overheard Kenzie Monroe stage whispering to a group of impressionable sophomores about how the new girl's father was probably unemployed and abusive, explaining why they had to move so frequently. The lies were crafted with surgical precision, designed to isolate her from potential allies, while painting her as damaged goods who might contaminate their pristine social environment. Avery made mental notes of each fabrication, understanding that every false narrative could eventually be turned against its creators through careful documentation and strategic revelation. The rumors spread through Pine Valley High School with viral efficiency. By lunchtime, students were staring at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion, their expressions revealing that they had absorbed the carefully planted suggestions about her background and her father's imaginary failures. She sat alone at her usual table near the windows, methodically eating her simple sandwich while observing how information warfare operated in a teenage ecosystem, watching as truth became irrelevant compared to the social capital gained by repeating salacious gossip. It was during this lunch period that Zara Kingsley first approached her table, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who understood the social cost of associating with a marked target. Zara was an artistic girl with purple-streaked hair and vintage band t-shirts who had once been part of Brielle's extended social circle before being cast out for refusing to participate in a particularly cruel prank against a younger student. Her expulsion from the popular crowd had been swift and total, but had left her with valuable intelligence about how the Glass Crown operated. Zara slid into the seat across from Avery, without invitation, her dark eyes scanning the cafeteria for potential threats. Before she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, "They tried the same thing with me last year," she said, pushing a folded piece of paper. Across the table, fake rumors about my family financial problems, manufactured drama, designed to make me radioactive to anyone who might defend me. The note contained detailed information about the Glass Crown's standard operating procedures, their methods for identifying targets, their techniques for isolating victims, and their strategies for maintaining plausible deniability. When administrators investigated complaints, reading Zara's intelligence briefing that evening in the privacy of her bedroom, Avery began to understand the sophisticated nature of the psychological warfare being waged against her. The Glass Crown didn't simply bully their targets. They systematically destroyed their social connections, their academic credibility, and their emotional stability through a campaign of sustained harassment that was carefully calibrated to remain just below the threshold that would trigger serious administrative intervention. They were experts at gaslighting, making their victims appear unstable or paranoid. When they tried to report the abuse, the digital offensive began. 3 days later, when Maddox Grant created fake social media profiles using Avery's name and photographed the accounts, posted embarrassing content designed to humiliate her, while making it appear that she was seeking attention through inappropriate behavior. Screenshots of these fake posts were shared throughout the school's informal social networks, reaching students who didn't even know her personally but were now exposed to carefully crafted evidence of her supposed character flaws. Avery discovered the fake profiles when Coach Ramirez approached her after PE class with an expression of concern and disappointment, asking if she was aware that inappropriate content was being shared online using her identity. The conversation was awkward and painful as Avery explained that someone was impersonating her digitally, while recognizing that her denials sounded exactly like what a guilty person would say to avoid consequences. Coach Ramirez listened carefully to her explanation, and though she seemed to believe Avery's version of events, the damage to her reputation had already begun. That afternoon, Avery visited the school's computer lab and began her own digital reconnaissance mission using techniques her father had taught her about online security and information warfare. She created anonymous accounts on various platforms and began documenting the fake profiles, gathering screenshots, timestamped evidence, and metadata that could prove the accounts were fraudulent. Her military upbringing had taught her that in any conflict, the side with better intelligence usually prevailed regardless of other advantages. Meanwhile, the social isolation campaign continued with surgical precision. Students who had previously been neutral or even friendly began avoiding her in hallways, their behavior suggesting they had been warned that associating with her could result in their own social exile. Avery noticed the subtle signs of coordinated ostracism, the way conversations stopped when she approached groups, the deliberate exclusion from study sessions and social gatherings, the careful spacing that left her sitting alone in classrooms and cafeterias. The psychological pressure was designed to be cumulative, each small humiliation building on the previous ones until the target's emotional defenses crumbled. Under the sustained assault, most students subjected to this treatment would eventually break down in public, providing the Glass Crown with the dramatic validation they craved, the tears and pleading that proved their power over their victims. But Avery had been raised by a man who understood that psychological resilience was as important as physical toughness in surviving hostile environments. During this period, Coach Ramirez began paying closer attention to Avery's behavior in PE class, noting her exceptional fitness level and the disciplined way she approached physical challenges. When other students complained about demanding exercises, Avery completed them without comment, her breathing controlled and her focus unwavering. It was clear that she had been trained in more than academic subjects, and Coach Ramirez began to suspect that there was more to the quiet new student than anyone realized. Mrs. Denby also took notice during English class when she assigned an essay on the theme of power dynamics in literature. Avery's paper analyzing the psychological manipulation tactics used by Iago in Othello was so sophisticated and insightful that it read like a graduate-level analysis of psychological warfare. The teacher made careful notes about Avery's understanding of how authority figures could be turned against their subordinates, through carefully planted suggestions and manufactured evidence. The breaking point in the Cold War came during Avery's 4th week at Pine Valley High School, when Brielle Carter made her first direct approach since the failed group project recruitment. She cornered Avery after chemistry class with Sierra Valles, flanking her like an armed escort. Their smiles were predatory as Brielle explained that she was concerned about the new students' difficulty adjusting to their school's social environment and wanted to offer her guidance on how to fit in better. The conversation was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. Brielle's tone remained friendly and helpful while her words carried unmistakable threats. She suggested that Avery might be happier at a different school where the social expectations weren't so demanding, where scholarship students weren't expected to compete with legacy families who had been part of the community for generations. Her offer to help Avery transfer somewhere more appropriate was delivered with such apparent sincerity that any observer would think she was being genuinely helpful. Avery listened to the entire performance without changing expression, then responded with a question that cut through the pretense like a blade. "Why are you trying so hard to make me smaller?" The words were delivered calmly, without anger or accusation, but they hit their target with devastating accuracy. Brielle's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the insecurity and rage that drove her need to dominate others. Before she recovered her composure and walked away, but not before Avery had seen the fear in her eyes. That evening, Marcus Cole found his daughter sitting at their kitchen table, surrounded by printed screenshots, organizational charts, and handwritten notes that looked like intelligence reports. He recognized the tactical thinking behind her documentation and felt a surge of pride mixed with concern as he realized that his training had prepared her for the psychological battlefield better than he had anticipated. When she looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much, he simply nodded and said something that would guide her through the battles ahead. "Never fight angry, sweetheart. Angry fighters make mistakes, and mistakes get you killed." They never imagined that trying to film Avery Cole's breakdown during the busiest lunch period of the week would be the strategic miscalculation that exposed their entire operation to public scrutiny for days. Brielle Carter and the Glass Crown had been planning the perfect ambush, a calculated assault designed to shatter the new girl's composure in front of maximum witnesses, while live streaming her humiliation to social media. But today, in the crowded cafeteria, where reputation was everything and image was armor, they were about to discover that the quiet target they'd chosen to destroy had been trained in psychological combat by a man who understood that the most devastating victories were won without throwing a single punch. The setup began during 3rd period, when Maddox Grant casually mentioned to several students that something interesting was going to happen during lunch in the cafeteria, suggesting they might want to have their phones ready to capture whatever drama was about to unfold. The whispered invitations spread through the school's informal communication networks, ensuring that Brielle's performance would have the audience she required. For maximum impact, students began adjusting their lunch schedules to ensure they would be present for whatever entertainment the Glass Crown had planned. Avery sensed the anticipation in the air as she entered the cafeteria that Tuesday afternoon. The energy in the room was different, charged with the electric excitement that preceded public spectacle. Students were clustering closer to her usual table, near the windows, their conversations subdued, but their attention focused on her. With predatory intensity, she recognized the signs of an impending ambush from her father's lessons about battlefield awareness and began implementing defensive protocols. While maintaining the appearance of casual normalcy, she selected her usual simple lunch of homemade sandwich and apple, then moved toward her customary table with measured steps, neither rushing nor hesitating as she navigated through the maze of occupied seats. The silence that followed her movement was unnatural to complete to be coincidental, and she understood that the trap had been carefully orchestrated to ensure maximum psychological impact. When it was finally sprung, Brielle Carter made her entrance like a queen approaching her throne, surrounded by her full entourage and followed by a trailing constellation of secondary players who fed off the drama that surrounded the Glass Crown's operations. She had dressed for the occasion in an outfit that cost more than most families spent on groceries. Her makeup was perfect, her smile was brilliant, and her eyes held the predatory gleam of someone who had never lost a social battle and expected this encounter to cement her legendary status. The approach was choreographed with theatrical precision. Brielle and her inner circle formed a semicircle around Avery's table, effectively trapping her while creating the perfect camera angles for the recording devices that had already begun capturing every moment Sierra Valles positioned herself to block any potential escape routes, while Kenzie Monroe flanked the opposite side, creating an intimidating physical presence that would discourage intervention from other students. Maddox Grant held his phone in recording position while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. Several other students had their devices ready, as well, ensuring that multiple angles would capture whatever breakdown was about to occur. The entire setup was designed to appear spontaneous while actually being as carefully planned as a military operation. Avery remained seated and continued eating her sandwich with deliberate calm while internally cataloging every face, every position, every detail that might become important when she eventually needed to reconstruct this encounter. For administrative review, she had learned from her father that the key to surviving ambushes was to avoid panic while gathering intelligence that could be used to turn the situation to your advantage. Brielle began her performance with apparent concern, asking loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear whether Avery was adjusting well to Pine Valley's demanding social environment and whether she needed any guidance about appropriate behavior for students who wanted to fit into their community. The words were carefully chosen to sound helpful while carrying unmistakable implications about Avery's status as an outsider who needed instruction about acceptable conduct. The psychological attack escalated quickly as Sierra joined the conversation with seemingly innocent questions about Avery's previous schools and why her family moved so frequently. The inquiries were designed to force her to either admit to embarrassing circumstances or appear evasive and secretive when she refused to provide details. Each question was calculated to reinforce the narrative that she was hiding shameful secrets while isolating her from potential defenders who might be contaminated by association. Kenzie contributed physical intimidation by moving closer to Avery's chair and casually placing her hands on the table in a gesture that appeared friendly, but actually trapped Avery in her seat while demonstrating the physical dominance that could be deployed if psychological pressure proved insufficient. The entire performance was masterful in its sophistication, designed to appear like concerned popular students reaching out to help a struggling newcomer while actually being a coordinated assault on her psychological defenses. The climax of the ambush came when Brielle produced a printed photograph of Avery eating lunch alone during her first week at Pine Valley and announced to the assembled audience that she was starting a buddy system to ensure that no student had to suffer the embarrassment of social isolation. The offer was presented as generous charity while actually being a public declaration that Avery was pathetic and friendless, requiring pity from her social superiors. The moment of truth arrived when Brielle extended her hand in a gesture that appeared magnanimous but was actually the final move in a carefully orchestrated humiliation designed to force Avery to either accept charity from her tormentor or appear ungrateful and hostile to students who were trying to help her. The surrounding crowd waited with anticipation, expecting to witness either grateful submission or an emotional breakdown that would provide entertainment and social media content. Instead, Avery looked up from her sandwich and asked a question that cut through the performance like a surgical blade, delivered in a voice that was calm, curious, and completely without anger. "Why are you trying so hard to make me smaller?" The words were spoken quietly, but in the sudden silence of the cafeteria, they carried with devastating clarity. To every corner of the room, the question reframed the entire encounter, transforming Brielle from a generous benefactor into an obvious aggressor, while positioning Avery as someone who recognized manipulation and refused to be diminished by it. The psychological tables had been turned in a single sentence, revealing the predatory nature of the supposed rescue mission while maintaining moral authority through restraint and dignity. Brielle's composure cracked visibly as she struggled to respond to a question that exposed her true motivations, while surrounded by witnesses who were now viewing the encounter through a completely different lens. Her carefully constructed persona of concerned popularity was collapsing under scrutiny. That revealed the calculating cruelty beneath her charitable mask. But Avery wasn't finished. She continued in the same calm, measured tone that suggested genuine curiosity rather than confrontation. "I've been watching you for weeks, and I noticed that you spend a lot of energy trying to make other people feel small. Is that because making them smaller makes you feel bigger?" The observation was delivered like a clinical assessment, completely free of malice, but devastating in its accuracy. The cafeteria had become completely silent as students realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, a direct challenge to the established power structure, delivered with such psychological sophistication that it couldn't be dismissed as adolescent rebellion or emotional instability. This was intellectual warfare conducted by someone who understood exactly what she was doing. Sierra attempted to rescue the situation by accusing Avery of being ungrateful for their generous offer of friendship. But the damage was already done. The entire encounter had been reframed as psychological bullying, disguised as charity, and any further protests only reinforced the accuracy of Avery's assessment. Several students were nodding in recognition as they realized they had witnessed this pattern before in other victims who had been targeted by the glass crown. Zara Kingsley chose that moment to approach the table and calmly sit down beside Avery, making the first public declaration of alliance that anyone at Pine Valley High School had dared to make against Brielle Carter's regime. Her presence transformed the dynamic from one student standing alone against a coordinated attack to the beginning of organized resistance against tyranny. The recording devices that had been positioned to capture Avery's humiliation had instead documented Brielle's tactical defeat, and Maddox Grant realized that the video evidence could be as damaging to the glass crown as it had been intended to be to their target. He discreetly stopped recording, while other students continued capturing what was rapidly becoming a legendary moment in Pine Valley social history. Brielle retreated with as much dignity as she could salvage, but her departure looked like exactly what it was: a strategic withdrawal by someone who had seriously underestimated their opponent. The whispered conversations that followed her exit were not admiring commentary about her performance, but shocked discussions about how completely she had been outmaneuvered by the quiet new girl who had just demonstrated that psychological warfare was a game that could be played by both sides. That afternoon, as Avery walked home with Zara beside her, she reflected on the tactical victory they had achieved, not through aggression or retaliation, but through calm exposure of truth under pressure. Her father's training had taught her that the most effective weapons were often words used precisely at the right moment. And today she had proven that lesson in the most public arena their school could provide. That evening, when Marcus Cole asked about her day, Avery described the cafeteria encounter with the same clinical precision she brought to all after-action reports. Her father listened carefully, then nodded with satisfaction as he recognized that his daughter had not only survived her first major engagement, but had begun to turn the psychological battlefield to her advantage. The war was far from over, but today had proven that Brielle Carter was not fighting a helpless victim, but a trained opponent who was just getting started. They never imagined that doctoring a video to make Avery Cole appear to cheat on her chemistry quiz would backfire so spectacularly when she turned their own digital weapons against them. For weeks, Maddox Grant had been perfecting his skills at deepfake technology and social media manipulation, believing he could destroy reputations with untraceable digital warfare. But today, in the principal's office where academic integrity determined everything, he was about to discover that the quiet girl he'd been targeting had learned to out-surveillance the surveillors, turning every pixel of fabricated evidence into proof of their coordinated harassment campaign. The digital assault began on a Wednesday morning when students throughout Pine Valley High School received anonymous links to a video that appeared to show Avery photographing test answers with her phone during Dr. Martinez's chemistry class. The footage was expertly edited, splicing together real classroom footage with manufactured close-ups that made her appear to be cheating while other students worked honestly around her. The video spread through social media with viral efficiency, accompanied by anonymous comments suggesting that scholarship students would do anything to maintain their academic advantages. Dr. Martinez called Avery to his desk after class with an expression of deep disappointment, asking her to explain the video evidence that had been brought to his attention. by concerned students, the conversation was painful as Avery maintained her innocence while recognizing that her denials sounded exactly like what a guilty student would say when confronted with apparent proof of academic dishonesty. The teacher's faith in her integrity was visibly shaking as more students came forward claiming they had witnessed suspicious behavior during previous tests. But Avery had been trained by her father to think tactically under pressure, and she requested 24 hours to provide a complete response to the allegations. Dr. Martinez agreed, reluctantly warning her that academic dishonesty would result in immediate expulsion. Regardless of her previous excellent performance, the threat hung over her like a sword, as she realized that her entire future was being weaponized by students who viewed her success as theft from their inherited privileges. That afternoon, Avery met with Zara in the school library, where they huddled over laptops, analyzing the fabricated video with the intensity of intelligence analysts examining enemy propaganda. Zara had learned digital forensics during her own persecution by the Glass Crown, and she quickly identified the telltale signs of editing software that had been used to splice Avery's image into compromising situations. The metadata revealed timestamps that proved the video had been assembled from multiple sources, rather than recorded as a continuous sequence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Meanwhile, Coach Ramirez had been conducting her own investigation after noticing that several of her most reliable students were suddenly questioning Avery's character based on social media rumors. The pay teacher had served in the Marines before becoming an educator, and she recognized psychological warfare when she saw it deployed against vulnerable targets. She quietly began documenting the pattern of harassment while encouraging Avery to maintain detailed logs of every incident, no matter how small. Mrs. Denby also took action during English class by assigning a creative writing exercise about truth versus perception in the digital age. Her prompt specifically asked students to explore how technology could be used to manipulate reality and destroy reputations through carefully crafted deception. Several students wrote essays that unconsciously revealed their knowledge of the techniques being used against Avery, providing additional evidence of the coordinated campaign. The breakthrough came when Zara introduced Avery to encrypted communication tools and digital security protocols that would protect their evidence gathering from interference by the Glass Crown's technical capabilities. They created secure backup systems for all documentation and began cross-referencing social media activity to identify the network of accounts being used to spread fabricated content about Avery's character and academic performance. Avery spent that evening in her bedroom surrounded by laptops and notebooks, creating what looked like a military intelligence briefing about the psychological warfare being conducted against her. She mapped the timing of each attack, the coordination between different platforms, and the sophisticated nature of the deepfake technology being deployed. Her analysis revealed that this wasn't random bullying, but a systematic campaign that required significant technical skills and careful planning. The next morning, Avery returned to Dr. Martinez's classroom with a comprehensive presentation that methodically dismantled every aspect of the fabricated video. She had prepared frame-by-frame analysis, showing the inconsistencies in lighting and perspective that proved digital manipulation. Metadata evidence revealing the video's assembly from multiple sources, and testimony from students who could verify her actual location. During the alleged cheating incident, Dr. Martinez listened to her presentation with growing amazement as he realized that his student had conducted a more thorough investigation than most professional forensics teams would have managed. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable, proving not only her innocence, but revealing the sophisticated nature of the attack against her academic reputation. He immediately contacted the administration to report the fabricated evidence, while privately marveling at Avery's analytical capabilities. Word of Avery's vindication spread through Pine Valley High School with the same viral efficiency that had carried the original accusations, but now the narrative had completely reversed. Students who had been quick to believe the worst about the girl were forced to confront evidence that they had been manipulated by classmates who were willing to destroy innocent reputations for social advantage. The Glass Crown's credibility suffered serious damage as their technical capabilities were exposed as weapons rather than pranks. Noah Bellamy approached Avery after her presentation to Dr. Martinez with an expression of genuine shame and admiration. He had been wavering between loyalty to Brielle's circle and his growing respect for Avery's character, but the evidence of fabricated accusations forced him to confront the reality that he had been complicit in persecution rather than popularity. Contests his quiet apology and offer of future support marked the first defection from Brielle's extended network. That evening, Marcus Cole reviewed his daughter's digital forensics presentation with professional pride, recognizing that she had applied military intelligence techniques to civilian psychological warfare with devastating effectiveness. Her methodical documentation and analytical precision had not only cleared her name, but had begun to expose the entire infrastructure of harassment that the Glass Crown had constructed around their victims. Maddox Grant realized that his technical skills had been turned against him as Avery's investigation revealed his digital fingerprints throughout the fabricated content. He had created. The quiet girl he'd been targeting had proven more sophisticated in cyber warfare than he had anticipated, and his anonymity was no longer protecting him from consequences. As administrators began tracing the fabricated evidence back to its sources, they thought that cornering Avery Cole behind the gymnasium where no teachers could interfere would finally provoke the physical confrontation they needed to justify her complete social destruction. But they never imagined that their carefully planned ambush would be recorded by security cameras they'd forgotten existed, while being witnessed by a former Marine who understood exactly what coordinated intimidation looked like when she saw it deployed against a teenage target. For days, Kenzie Monroe and Sierra Velez had been planning the perfect setup designed to make Avery throw the first punch so they could claim self-defense while destroying her reputation as a violent scholarship kid. But today, in the isolated area behind the gym, where they believed they held every advantage, they were about to discover that provoking someone trained in psychological warfare was the tactical mistake that would cost them everything. The trap was set during lunch period, when Sierra casually mentioned to Avery that some students wanted to speak with her privately about the recent video controversy, suggesting that a peaceful conversation might help clear the air and prevent further misunderstandings. The invitation was delivered with apparent sincerity, while actually being bait designed to lure her away from witnesses who might interfere with their planned escalation to physical confrontation. Avery recognized the setup immediately, but decided to spring the trap deliberately, understanding that documenting their behavior in a controlled environment would provide better evidence than waiting for them to choose the time and place for their next assault. She agreed to the meeting while discreetly activating the recording app on her phone and positioning the device to capture whatever confrontation was about to unfold. The location behind the gymnasium was strategically chosen for its isolation from normal foot traffic and apparent absence of administrative oversight. Kenzie and Sierra had scouted the area carefully, believing they had found the perfect spot to provoke Avery into reacting with violence that could be used to justify her expulsion from Pine Valley High School. What they hadn't realized was that Coach Ramirez made regular security rounds of the entire athletic complex and had installed her own discreet surveillance system after previous incidents of student harassment in isolated areas. The confrontation began with false concern as Sierra expressed worry about how the fabricated video controversy might be affecting Avery's emotional stability, suggesting that scholarship students often struggled with the pressure of competing academically with students from more privileged backgrounds. The words were carefully chosen to sound supportive while actually being psychological provocations designed to trigger defensive anger that could escalate into physical confrontation. Kenzie joined the assault by questioning whether Avery's military family background might have given her violent tendencies that could pose a danger to other students. The accusation was delivered with mock concern while actually being character assassination designed to plant seeds of fear about her potential for physical aggression. The entire performance was choreographed to appear like worried classmates trying to help a troubled student while actually being coordinated psychological warfare. Avery responded with questions rather than accusations, asking why they had chosen this isolated location for a conversation about academic concerns, and whether they had considered involving counselors or teachers who were trained to help students navigate social difficulties. Her calm, analytical approach transformed their ambush into an interrogation that exposed their true intentions. While maintaining her moral authority through restraint and logical inquiry, the tactical tables turned when Avery began documenting their behavior in real time, describing their positioning, their coordinated approach, and their apparent preparation for physical confrontation, while asking whether they had informed anyone about this meeting, or whether they preferred to handle student concerns without administrative oversight. Her questions revealed the predatory nature of their setup. While creating an audio record of their intentions, Sierra attempted to escalate by moving closer and making veiled threats about what happened to students who didn't fit into Pine Valley's social environment. But Avery had been trained in situational awareness, and she maintained optimal positioning while continuing to document every threat and intimidation tactic being deployed against her. The psychological pressure that was supposed to break her composure was instead being turned into evidence of coordinated harassment. The climax came when Kenzie deliberately bumped into Avery, while Sierra blocked her exit path, creating the physical confrontation they needed to justify claiming self-defense when they attacked her. But instead of reacting with violence, Avery simply stepped back and asked in a clear voice that carried to the security cameras whether they were attempting to assault her, and whether this was the outcome they had planned when they lured her to this isolated location. At that precise moment, Coach Ramirez rounded the corner of the gymnasium, having been alerted by her security system that students were gathering in an area where harassment had previously occurred. Her military training allowed her to assess the tactical situation, immediately recognizing coordinated intimidation. When she saw it deployed against an outnumbered target, her presence transformed the encounter from predator versus prey into documented evidence of attempted assault. Under adult supervision, Kenzie and Sierra attempted to claim they had been trying to help Avery work through her social adjustment problems, but their positioning, their coordination, and the recordings on Avery's phone told a completely different story. Coach Ramirez confiscated all devices while escorting everyone to the principal's office for formal documentation of what appeared to be attempted assault. Disguised as peer counseling, the aftermath was swift and decisive as administrators reviewed security footage, Avery's audio recordings, and witness testimony that revealed a coordinated attempt to provoke violence while maintaining plausible deniability about aggressive intentions. The glass crown's pattern of harassment was finally being documented by adult authority figures who recognized psychological warfare. When evidence was presented professionally that evening, Avery debriefed the encounter with her father, who listened with professional pride as she described how military situational awareness training had allowed her to turn an ambush into evidence collection while maintaining moral authority through restraint. Marcus Cole recognized that his daughter had begun thinking like a special operations soldier, understanding that the most effective victories were achieved through intelligence and documentation rather than physical confrontation. Sarah celebrated the tactical victory while beginning to organize other students who had been targeted by similar harassment techniques. The evidence from behind the gymnasium had provided proof that the glass crown's persecution was systematic rather than spontaneous, opening possibilities for collective resistance that could challenge their entire power structure through coordinated documentation and administrative intervention. They never imagined that live streaming their ultimate humiliation party for Avery Cole would create permanent evidence of their conspiracy to systematically destroy an innocent student's reputation through coordinated psychological warfare. For weeks, Brielle Carter had been planning the perfect social execution disguised as reconciliation, elite gathering, where Avery would be publicly forgiven while being privately destroyed. But tonight, in the Carter family's mansion, where privilege ruled and cameras captured everything, they were about to discover that the quiet girl they'd invited as a victim had arrived as a predator ready to turn their own weapons against them with surgical precision. The invitation came through Noah Bellamy, who approached Avery with apparent reluctance to deliver Brielle's message of reconciliation. The offer was presented as a genuine desire to end the conflict and welcome her into Pine Valley's social elite with a private party where misunderstandings could be resolved away from the pressures of public school politics. Noah's discomfort was visible as he delivered the invitation, but he claimed that Brielle had insisted on personally apologizing for the recent tensions between them. Avery accepted, immediately understanding that refusing would be interpreted as fear, while attending would provide an opportunity to document the glass crown's behavior in their natural environment where they felt completely safe from consequences. She spent the evening preparing for psychological warfare, treating the party like a military operation that required intelligence-gathering, tactical positioning, and evidence collection capabilities. The Carter Mansion was a monument to generational wealth, with architectural features that cost more than most families earned in lifetimes. The party was deliberately small and exclusive, featuring only Brielle's inner circle and a few carefully selected witnesses who could testify to her magnanimous gesture of friendship toward the scholarship student who had been causing social disruption through her refusal to accept her proper place in the hierarchy. Brielle greeted Avery with theatrical warmth, embracing her like a long-lost friend, while positioning them both in front of multiple recording devices that would capture every moment of the reconciliation performance for social media distribution. The entire setup was choreographed to appear spontaneous, while actually being as carefully planned as a political campaign designed to rehabilitate Brielle's image. While cementing Avery's subordination, the early stages of the party proceeded according to script, with Brielle playing the gracious hostess who had risen above petty conflicts to embrace forgiveness and inclusion. Her performance was masterful, combining apparent sincerity with subtle demonstrations of superiority that reminded everyone present of the vast economic and social gulf between her world and Avery's temporary residence in their community. Sierra and Kenzie played supporting roles as reformed mean girls who had learned valuable lessons about acceptance and kindness. Their apologies were delivered with practiced emotion, while their body language revealed the predatory anticipation of someone waiting for their victim to lower their guard so the real assault could begin. The turning point came when Brielle produced a specially crafted crown made of paper and plastic, designed to look like something from a dollar store. She announced to the assembled guests that she wanted to crown Avery as the honorary queen of new students, recognizing her unique contributions to their school's diversity and social consciousness. The gesture was presented as ultimate acceptance, while actually being ultimate humiliation, as the fake crown was placed on her head. Avery activated the recording app on her phone while maintaining perfect composure despite the laughter and camera flashes that documented her supposed gratitude for this charitable recognition. She understood that this moment was the climax of everything the glass crown had been building toward, the final proof of their power to transform enemies into grateful subjects. But instead of breaking down or accepting the humiliation, Avery began speaking in a calm, clear voice that carried throughout the mansion's acoustically perfect great room. She thanked Brielle for providing such clear evidence of her character and her methods, while describing for the cameras exactly what psychological manipulation looked like when deployed by people who mistook cruelty for sophistication. The tables turned completely when Avery revealed that she had been recording conversations throughout the evening, including Brielle's private admission to Sierra that the entire reconciliation was performance art designed to destroy the scholarship girls' remaining dignity while creating viral content that would cement the glass crown's legendary status among Pine Valley's social elite. The revelation that their private conversations had been documented sent shockwaves through the party as guests realized that their casual cruelty and calculated harassment had been captured by someone who understood exactly how to use their own tactics against them. Brielle's mask of gracious hostility finally slipped, revealing the rage and panic beneath her carefully constructed persona. Maddox attempted to confiscate Avery's phone, but she had already uploaded the recordings to secure cloud storage while sending copies to trusted allies who could ensure the evidence would survive any attempts at suppression or retaliation. The technical skills he had used to create fabricated content were no match for her strategic thinking about information warfare and evidence preservation. The party disintegrated as guests realized they had been exposed, documenting their participation in systematic harassment While believing they were attending a social triumph, Avery walked out of the mansion, with quiet dignity, leaving behind a room full of people who finally understood that they had seriously underestimated their opponent. Noah followed her outside with genuine shame and admiration, acknowledging that he had been complicit in persecution, while admiring her tactical brilliance in turning their weapons against them. His decision to publicly distance himself from Brielle marked the beginning of the Glass Crown's political collapse, as other students recognized that their power was no longer absolute. Within hours, footage from the party had spread throughout Pine Valley High School's social networks, but instead of humiliating Avery, it exposed the calculated cruelty of students who had used privilege as a weapon. While hiding behind charitable pretenses, the narrative had completely reversed, with Brielle appearing as a manipulative aggressor and Avery as a dignified victim who had documented her own persecution. That night, Zara helped analyze the evidence they had collected, recognizing that the recordings contained enough material to prove systematic harassment, conspiracy, and possibly criminal intimidation. The Glass Crown had finally provided the documentation needed to involve serious administrative and potentially legal consequences for their behavior. Marcus Cole reviewed the evening's intelligence gathering with professional satisfaction, recognizing that his daughter had successfully infiltrated enemy territory while maintaining operational security throughout a complex psychological warfare mission. Her tactical thinking and evidence collection had transformed what was intended as her social execution into the beginning of her opponent's downfall. They never imagined that framing Avery Cole with fabricated disciplinary infractions would expose their entire network of corruption. When she systematically dismantled every false accusation with evidence they didn't know she possessed for months, Brielle Carter and her remaining allies had been building toward this moment a coordinated character assassination that would force the administration to expel the scholarship girl before she could cause further damage to their carefully constructed social order. But today, in Principal Harrison's office, where academic futures were decided, they were about to discover that the quiet target they'd been persecuting had been documenting their conspiracy with the precision of a federal investigation, ready to turn their own lies into proof of systematic harassment that reached into the very foundations of Pine Valley High School's power structure. The assault began on a Monday morning when Avery was summoned from first period chemistry to the principal's office, where she found Principal Harrison reviewing a thick file of disciplinary complaints that had allegedly been building throughout her semester at Pine Valley. The accusations were comprehensive and damning: cheating on multiple assignments, vandalizing school property, threatening other students, and violating the technology use policy. Through cyberbullying activities, each charge was supported by what appeared to be documentary evidence, including photographs, witness statements, and digital records that painted her as a dangerous student who had been hiding her true nature behind academic excellence. Principal Harrison explained with obvious reluctance that the accumulation of complaints had reached a level that required immediate action regardless of her previous stellar academic performance. The evidence seemed overwhelming, with multiple independent sources corroborating a pattern of misconduct that suggested she was fundamentally unsuited for Pine Valley's educational environment. The threat of immediate suspension, pending expulsion, hung over the meeting like an executioner's blade, as she realized that her entire future was being weaponized by students who viewed her success as theft from their inherited privileges. But Avery had been trained by her father to think tactically under extreme pressure, and she requested permission to review each accusation individually while providing her own documentation. In response, Principal Harrison agreed, somewhat surprised by her calm demeanor when confronted with what appeared to be irrefutable evidence of systematic misconduct. Most students facing such comprehensive charges would be emotional or defensive, but Avery approached the situation like an intelligence analyst examining enemy propaganda designed to discredit legitimate operations. The first accusation involved alleged cheating on her chemistry midterm, supported by a photograph that appeared to show her using unauthorized notes during the examination. But Avery produced timestamped security footage from Dr. Martinez's classroom that proved the photograph had been taken during a study session. rather than during the actual test. Her methodical breakdown of the fabricated evidence revealed sophisticated digital manipulation designed to create false documentation while maintaining plausible deniability about the source of the accusations. The vandalism charges were supported by photographs showing graffiti that targeted Pine Valley's most prominent families, painted on walls near the athletic complex. But Avery's comprehensive alibi documentation proved she had been volunteering at her grandmother's hospital during the times when the vandalism allegedly occurred. Her meticulous record-keeping of every moment spent outside school property created an ironclad defense while revealing that someone had been carefully monitoring her schedule to identify windows when false charges could be planted. The cyberbullying accusations were the most sophisticated, involving fake social media accounts that appeared to belong to her while posting threatening content directed at Brielle and her inner circle. But Avery had anticipated this attack vector and had been maintaining detailed logs of her actual digital activity, including IP addresses, timestamps, and device identifications that proved the malicious accounts were created and operated by someone else entirely. Her technical analysis revealed digital fingerprints that pointed directly back to Maddox Grant's devices. As each accusation crumbled under scrutiny, Principal Harrison's expression shifted from disappointment to amazement as he realized that his student had not only prepared comprehensive defenses, but had actually been conducting a counterintelligence operation that exposed the fabrication of evidence on an unprecedented scale. The documentation she provided was more thorough than most professional investigations, revealing a level of strategic thinking that seemed impossible for a teenager facing systematic persecution. The breakthrough came when Avery presented audio recordings of conversations where members of the Glass Crown discussed their plan to manufacture disciplinary infractions that would force her expulsion, while maintaining their own innocence through carefully constructed alibis. The recordings revealed not only their coordination, but their contempt for the administrative process. They were manipulating to achieve their personal vendetta against a student whose only crime was refusing to accept their social dominance. Coach Ramirez arrived at the meeting with additional evidence she had been collecting, including security footage that contradicted several witness statements and documentation of the pattern of harassment that had escalated from social exclusion to systematic character assassination. Her military background had allowed her to recognize psychological warfare when she saw it deployed against a vulnerable target, and she had been building a case that would protect Avery while exposing the conspiracy against her. Mrs. Denby joined the meeting with her own intelligence gathered through careful analysis of student writing assignments that revealed knowledge of harassment techniques and coordination among the accusers. Several students had inadvertently revealed their involvement in manufacturing evidence through creative writing exercises that described scenarios remarkably similar to the charges being leveled against Avery. Her documentation provided additional proof that the accusations were coordinated fiction rather than independent observations. The meeting was interrupted when Zara Kingsley arrived with a delegation of students who had also been targeted by similar harassment campaigns. Their collective testimony revealed that the Glass Crown had been using fabricated disciplinary infractions as a standard weapon against students who challenged their authority. The pattern was clear and systematic, proving that Avery's case was not isolated misconduct, but part of a broader conspiracy to manipulate the disciplinary process for personal vendettas. Noah Bellamy's testimony provided the final piece of evidence needed to expose the entire conspiracy. His insider knowledge of the Glass Crown's operations allowed him to detail their methods for manufacturing evidence, coordinating false witness statements, and timing accusations to maximize psychological pressure on their targets. His decision to testify against his former allies marked a complete break with Brielle's faction while providing administrative authorities with proof of systematic corruption. Principal Harrison found himself confronting evidence of the most sophisticated harassment campaign in Pine Valley High School's history, with students using advanced technology and coordinated deception to manipulate disciplinary processes for personal advantage. The implications were staggering, not only for the immediate case, but for every previous disciplinary action that might have been influenced By similar tactics, the integrity of the entire system was being called into question by a teenager who had documented corruption with professional precision. The immediate consequences were swift and severe as administrators realized they had been manipulated into becoming weapons in a psychological warfare campaign. Brielle Carter faced immediate suspension pending investigation, while Kenzie Monroe and Sierra Valles were removed from all leadership positions and placed under disciplinary review. Maddox Grant's technical devices were confiscated as evidence of cybercrime that might require law enforcement involvement. Dr. Martinez provided character testimony that highlighted Avery's exceptional integrity and academic performance, while Coach Ramirez detailed her observations of psychological resilience. Under extreme pressure, Mrs. Denby submitted analysis of Avery's writing that revealed sophisticated understanding of justice and moral reasoning that contradicted every accusation being leveled against her character. The collective testimony painted a picture of a student whose only fault was refusing to be intimidated by those who viewed persecution as entertainment. The legal implications began emerging as principal Harrison consulted with the school district's attorneys about potential criminal charges for manufacturing evidence, cyberbullying, conspiracy, and harassment. The Glass Crown's activities had crossed the line from teenage drama into serious misconduct that could result in permanent disciplinary records and possible prosecution. The privileges that had protected them from consequences were no longer sufficient to shield them from the evidence they had created while attempting to destroy an innocent student. Avery's vindication was complete and public as the administration issued formal apologies while implementing new policies designed to prevent similar harassment campaigns. The case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing privilege to override justice, while demonstrating that systematic documentation could expose even the most sophisticated attempts at character assassination. That evening, Marcus Cole reviewed the day's victory with pride that went beyond parental satisfaction. His daughter had not only survived a coordinated assault on her character, but had turned the attack into evidence that would protect future students from similar persecution. Her tactical thinking and evidence collection had dismantled a corruption network that had been operating unopposed for years, proving that individual courage, combined with systematic preparation, could challenge institutional failures. They never imagined that inviting Avery Cole to address the emergency student assembly about Pine Valley's toxic climate would transform their quiet target into the voice of a revolution that would permanently change the power dynamics of their supposedly elite institution. For weeks, administrators had been struggling with how to address the systematic harassment scandal that had exposed corruption reaching into the very foundations of their disciplinary system. But today, in the packed auditorium where reputations were made and broken, they were about to witness a speech that would be remembered as the moment when silence finally found its voice and dignity became more powerful than privilege. The assembly had been called after the Glass Crown investigation revealed the scope of harassment campaigns that had been operating with impunity throughout Pine Valley High School. Principal Harrison faced a crisis of institutional credibility as parents demanded explanations for how systematic persecution had been allowed to flourish while being disguised as normal teenage social dynamics. The school board had mandated immediate action to restore public confidence while addressing the cultural problems that had enabled coordinated psychological warfare against vulnerable students. Avery had been approached by multiple administrators who recognized that her case had become symbolic of broader institutional failures. They needed someone who could speak with moral authority about the damage caused by unchecked privilege, while offering hope for positive change moving forward. Her reputation for tactical thinking and ethical behavior made her the obvious choice to address the student body about creating a more just and inclusive environment. The invitation to speak came with significant political implications, as students, faculty, and parents would be evaluating not only her words, but her presence as a symbol of resistance against entrenched power structures. Avery understood that this moment represented an opportunity to transform individual victory into systemic change by articulating principles that could guide future policy while inspiring other students to reject the normalization of psychological warfare disguised as social competition. challenge institutional failures they never imagined that inviting Avery Cole to address the emergency student assembly about Pine Valley's toxic climate would transform their quiet target into the voice of a revolution that would permanently change the power dynamics of their supposedly elite institution. For weeks, administrators had been struggling with how to address the systematic harassment scandal that had exposed corruption reaching into the very foundations of their disciplinary system. But today, in the packed auditorium where reputations were made and broken, they were about to witness a speech that would be remembered as the moment when silence finally found its voice and dignity became more powerful than privilege. The assembly had been called after the Glass Crown investigation revealed the scope of harassment campaigns that had been operating with impunity throughout Pine Valley High School. Principal Harrison faced a crisis of institutional credibility as parents demanded explanations for how systematic persecution had been allowed to flourish while being disguised as normal teenage social dynamics. The school board had mandated immediate action to restore public confidence while addressing the cultural problems that had enabled coordinated psychological warfare against vulnerable students. Avery had been approached by multiple administrators who recognized that her case had become symbolic of broader institutional failures. They needed someone who could speak with moral authority about the damage caused by unchecked privilege, while offering hope for positive change moving forward. Her reputation for tactical thinking and ethical behavior made her the obvious choice to address the student body about creating a more just and inclusive environment. The invitation to speak came with significant political implications, as students, faculty, and parents would be evaluating not only her words, but her presence as a symbol of resistance against entrenched power structures. Avery understood that this moment represented an opportunity to transform individual victory into systemic change by articulating principles that could guide future policy while inspiring other students to reject the normalization of psychological warfare disguised as social competition. The final assault was planned during Brielle's suspension, as she coordinated with her remaining allies through encrypted communications, believing that her temporary removal from campus would provide perfect cover for launching an attack that couldn't be traced back to her directly. Maddox Grant had spent weeks perfecting deepfake technology that could create convincing video evidence of Avery engaging in inappropriate behavior with adult men. The planned video would be distributed through anonymous accounts during the height of reform discussions, making it impossible for her to recover her reputation or credibility. What they didn't understand was that Avery had been monitoring their digital communications since the beginning of the harassment campaign, using techniques her father had taught her about signals intelligence and electronic surveillance. She had been documenting their planning process while allowing them to believe their encrypted channels were secure. Her patience in gathering evidence rather than seeking immediate revenge was about to pay dividends that would end their conspiracy permanently. The deepfake video was released on a Wednesday evening through multiple anonymous social media accounts, with sophisticated distribution techniques designed to achieve maximum viral spread. Before administrators could respond, the fabricated content was expertly crafted, combining Avery's face with explicit footage in scenarios designed to destroy her character while being plausible enough to convince casual viewers who didn't examine the technical details carefully. But Avery had been expecting this exact attack and had prepared comprehensive countermeasures that were deployed within minutes of the video's appearance. She released her own evidence package containing the original source material used in the deepfake, the technical analysis proving digital manipulation, and recordings of Brielle and Maddox discussing their plan to create the fabricated content. Her response was so immediate and thorough that it prevented the false narrative from gaining traction, while turning the attack into evidence of criminal behavior. The technical analysis she provided was sophisticated enough to satisfy law enforcement forensics teams, revealing not only that the video was fabricated, but providing digital fingerprints that traced its creation directly to Maddox's devices. Her documentation included timestamps that proved the planning had occurred during school hours while Brielle was supposed to be serving suspension, creating additional evidence of coordination and premeditation that elevated the charges beyond simple harassment. Federal authorities became involved when the Investigation revealed that the harassment campaign had crossed state lines through social media distribution while involving sophisticated cybercrime techniques that fell under federal jurisdiction. The FBI's cybercrime unit recognized patterns in the Glass Crown's activities that suggested they might have been targeting students at other schools, creating a multi-jurisdictional investigation that would have consequences far beyond Pine Valley High School. Maddox Grant's digital devices were seized as evidence, revealing a comprehensive archive of harassment campaigns targeting not only Avery but dozens of other students across multiple school districts. His technical skills had been deployed as weapons against vulnerable teenagers, while he maintained detailed records of each attack, apparently proud of his ability to destroy reputations through digital manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, proving systematic cybercrime that had been operating for years. Brielle Carter's coordination of the conspiracy from suspension created additional legal jeopardy, as prosecutors argued that her actions demonstrated sophisticated criminal intent rather than teenage impulsivity. Her use of encrypted communications to direct attacks while maintaining plausible deniability revealed understanding of legal consequences that undermined any claims of youthful ignorance about the severity of her actions. The legal consequences extended beyond the immediate perpetrators, as investigators discovered that several adults had been aware of the harassment campaigns without reporting them to appropriate authorities. Pine Valley High School's administration faced potential liability for failing to protect students from systematic abuse, while several faculty members were placed under investigation for their response to documented complaints. Avery's role in the investigation transformed from victim to key witness as law enforcement recognized that her documentation had been more thorough than most professional investigations. Her systematic evidence collection had preserved digital trails that might otherwise have been destroyed, while her technical analysis provided crucial insights into sophisticated cybercrime techniques that were being deployed against teenage targets. The community response was swift and decisive as parents realized that their children had been targeted by criminal harassment that went far beyond normal teenage conflict. The revelation that deepfake technology was being used to create false evidence against high school students created widespread concern about the escalation of cyberbullying into serious criminal territory. Noah Bellamy provided crucial testimony about the Glass Crown's internal operations, while Zara Kingsley's documentation of harassment techniques helped investigators understand the scope of activities that had been disguised as normal social dynamics. Their cooperation with law enforcement demonstrated that the reform movement had evolved beyond school politics into serious engagement with criminal justice systems. Dr. Martinez and Coach Ramirez testified about the sophisticated nature of academic fraud attempts, while Mrs. Denby provided analysis of written communications that revealed coordination and premeditation. The faculty testimony painted a picture of systematic criminal activity that had been operating under the cover of elite teenage social competition. The criminal charges were comprehensive, including cyberstalking, harassment, conspiracy to distribute false information, and federal cybercrime violations that carried potential jail time rather than simple disciplinary consequences. Brielle Carter faced the possibility of permanent criminal records that would affect college admissions, employment opportunities, and professional licensing throughout her adult life. Maddox Grant's technical expertise became evidence against him as prosecutors demonstrated that his sophisticated knowledge of digital manipulation proved criminal intent rather than youthful experimentation. His archive of harassment campaigns against multiple victims created a pattern that suggested predatory behavior rather than isolated incidents of poor judgment. The civil litigation that followed created additional consequences as families of targeted students filed lawsuits seeking damages for psychological harm and reputational damage. The financial exposure extended beyond the immediate perpetrators to include their families and potentially the school district that had failed to protect students from systematic abuse. Avery's transformation from victim to catalyst for systematic reform attracted national attention as her case became symbolic of broader issues around cyberbullying, digital harassment, and the responsibility of institutions to protect vulnerable students. From sophisticated persecution campaigns, her story inspired similar investigations at schools throughout the country as administrators recognized that traditional anti-bullying approaches were inadequate for addressing coordinated psychological warfare. The final assault was planned during Brielle's suspension, as she coordinated with her remaining allies through encrypted communications, believing that her temporary removal from campus would provide perfect cover for launching an attack that couldn't be traced back to her directly. Maddox Grant had spent weeks perfecting deepfake technology that could create convincing video evidence of Avery engaging in inappropriate behavior with adult men. The planned video would be distributed through anonymous accounts during the height of reform discussions, making it impossible for her to recover her reputation or credibility. What they didn't understand was that Avery had been monitoring their digital communications since the beginning of the harassment campaign, using techniques her father had taught her about signals intelligence and electronic surveillance. She had been documenting their planning process while allowing them to believe their encrypted channels were secure. Her patience in gathering evidence rather than seeking immediate revenge was about to pay dividends that would end their conspiracy permanently. The deepfake video was released on a Wednesday evening through multiple anonymous social media accounts, with sophisticated distribution techniques designed to achieve maximum viral spread. Before administrators could respond, the fabricated content was expertly crafted, combining Avery's face with explicit footage in scenarios designed to destroy her character while being plausible enough to convince casual viewers who didn't examine the technical details carefully. But Avery had been expecting this exact attack and had prepared comprehensive countermeasures that were deployed within minutes of the video's appearance. She released her own evidence package containing the original source material used in the deepfake, the technical analysis proving digital manipulation, and recordings of Brielle and Maddox discussing their plan to create the fabricated content. Her response was so immediate and thorough that it prevented the false narrative from gaining traction, while turning the attack into evidence of criminal behavior. The technical analysis she provided was sophisticated enough to satisfy law enforcement forensics teams, revealing not only that the video was fabricated, but providing digital fingerprints that traced its creation directly to Maddox's devices. Her documentation included timestamps that proved the planning had occurred during school hours while Brielle was supposed to be serving suspension, creating additional evidence of coordination and premeditation that elevated the charges beyond simple harassment. Federal authorities became involved when the investigation revealed that the harassment campaign had crossed state lines through social media distribution while involving sophisticated cybercrime techniques that fell under federal jurisdiction. The FBI's cybercrime unit recognized patterns in the Glass Crown's activities that suggested they might have been targeting students at other schools, creating a multi-jurisdictional investigation that would have consequences far beyond Pine Valley High School. Maddox Grant's digital devices were seized as evidence, revealing a comprehensive archive of harassment campaigns targeting not only Avery but dozens of other students across multiple school districts. His technical skills had been deployed as weapons against vulnerable teenagers, while he maintained detailed records of each attack, apparently proud of his ability to destroy reputations through digital manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, proving systematic cybercrime that had been operating for years. Brielle Carter's coordination of the conspiracy from suspension created additional legal jeopardy, as prosecutors argued that her actions demonstrated sophisticated criminal intent rather than teenage impulsivity. Her use of encrypted communications to direct attacks while maintaining plausible deniability revealed understanding of legal consequences that undermined any claims of youthful ignorance about the severity of her actions. The legal consequences extended beyond the immediate perpetrators, as investigators discovered that several adults had been aware of the harassment campaigns without reporting them to appropriate authorities. Pine Valley High School's administration faced potential liability for failing to protect students from systematic abuse, while several faculty members were placed under investigation for their response to documented complaints. Avery's role in the investigation transformed from victim to key witness as law enforcement recognized that her documentation had been more thorough than most professional investigations. Her systematic evidence collection had preserved digital trails that might otherwise have been destroyed, while her technical analysis provided crucial insights into sophisticated cybercrime. Techniques that were being deployed against teenage targets. The community response was swift and decisive as parents realized that their children had been targeted by criminal harassment that went far beyond normal teenage conflict. The revelation that deepfake technology was being used to create false evidence against high school students created widespread concern about the escalation of cyberbullying into serious criminal territory. Noah Bellamy provided crucial testimony about the Glass Crown's internal operations, while Zara Kingsley's documentation of harassment techniques helped investigators understand the scope of activities that had been disguised as normal social dynamics. Their cooperation with law enforcement demonstrated that the reform movement had evolved beyond school politics into serious engagement with criminal justice systems. Dr. Martinez and Coach Ramirez testified about the sophisticated nature of academic fraud attempts, while Mrs. Denby provided analysis of written communications that revealed coordination and premeditation. The faculty testimony painted a picture of systematic criminal activity that had been operating under the cover of elite teenage social competition. The criminal charges were comprehensive, including cyberstalking, harassment, conspiracy to distribute false information, and federal cybercrime violations that carried potential jail time rather than simple disciplinary consequences. Brielle Carter faced the possibility of permanent criminal records that would affect college admissions, employment opportunities, and professional licensing throughout her adult life. Maddox Grant's technical expertise became evidence against him as prosecutors demonstrated that his sophisticated knowledge of digital manipulation proved criminal intent rather than youthful experimentation. His archive of harassment campaigns against multiple victims created a pattern that suggested predatory behavior rather than isolated incidents of poor judgment. The civil litigation that followed created additional consequences as families of targeted students filed lawsuits seeking damages for psychological harm and reputational damage. The financial exposure extended beyond the immediate perpetrators to include their families and potentially the school district that had failed to protect students from systematic abuse. Avery's transformation from victim to catalyst for systematic reform attracted national attention as her case became symbolic of broader issues around cyberbullying, digital harassment, and the responsibility of institutions to protect vulnerable students from sophisticated persecution campaigns. Her story inspired similar investigations at schools throughout the country as administrators recognized that traditional anti-bullying approaches were inadequate for addressing coordinated psychological warfare. The final assault was planned during Brielle's suspension, as she coordinated with her remaining allies through encrypted communications, believing that her temporary removal from campus would provide perfect cover for launching an attack that couldn't be traced back to her directly. Maddox Grant had spent weeks perfecting deepfake technology that could create convincing video evidence of Avery engaging in inappropriate behavior with adult men. The planned video would be distributed through anonymous accounts during the height of reform discussions, making it impossible for her to recover her reputation or credibility. What they didn't understand was that Avery had been monitoring their digital communications since the beginning of the harassment campaign, using techniques her father had taught her about signals intelligence and electronic surveillance. She had been documenting their planning process while allowing them to believe their encrypted channels were secure. Her patience in gathering evidence rather than seeking immediate revenge was about to pay dividends that would end their conspiracy permanently. The deepfake video was released on a Wednesday evening through multiple anonymous social media accounts with sophisticated distribution techniques designed to achieve maximum viral spread. Before administrators could respond, the fabricated content was expertly crafted, combining Avery's face with explicit footage in scenarios designed to destroy her character while being plausible enough to convince casual viewers who didn't examine the technical details carefully. But Avery had been expecting this exact attack and had prepared comprehensive countermeasures that were deployed within minutes of the video's appearance. She released her own evidence package containing the original source material used in the deepfake, the technical analysis proving digital manipulation, and recordings of Brielle and Maddox discussing their plan to create the fabricated content. Her response was so immediate and thorough that it prevented the false narrative from gaining traction, while turning the attack into evidence of criminal behavior. The technical analysis she provided was sophisticated enough to satisfy law enforcement forensics teams, revealing not only that the video was fabricated, but providing digital fingerprints that traced its creation directly to Maddox's devices. Her documentation included timestamps that proved the planning had occurred during school hours while Brielle was supposed to be serving suspension, creating additional evidence of coordination and premeditation that elevated the charges beyond simple harassment. Federal authorities became involved when the investigation revealed that the harassment campaign had crossed state lines through social media distribution while involving sophisticated cybercrime techniques that fell under federal jurisdiction. The FBI's cybercrime unit recognized patterns in the Glass Crown's activities that suggested they might have been targeting students at other schools, creating a multi-jurisdictional investigation that would have consequences far beyond Pine Valley High School. Maddox Grant's digital devices were seized as evidence, revealing a comprehensive archive of harassment campaigns targeting not only Avery but dozens of other students across multiple school districts. His technical skills had been deployed as weapons against vulnerable teenagers, while he maintained detailed records of each attack, apparently proud of his ability to destroy reputations through digital manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, proving systematic cybercrime that had been operating for years. Brielle Carter's coordination of the conspiracy from suspension created additional legal jeopardy, as prosecutors argued that her actions demonstrated sophisticated criminal intent rather than teenage impulsivity. Her use of encrypted communications to direct attacks while maintaining plausible deniability revealed understanding of legal consequences that undermined any claims of youthful ignorance about the severity of her actions. The legal consequences extended beyond the immediate perpetrators, as investigators discovered that several adults had been aware of the harassment campaigns without reporting them to appropriate authorities. Pine Valley High School's administration faced potential liability for failing to protect students from systematic abuse, while several faculty members were placed under investigation for their response to documented complaints. Avery's role in the investigation transformed from victim to key witness as law enforcement recognized that her documentation had been more thorough than most professional investigations. Her systematic evidence collection had preserved digital trails that might otherwise have been destroyed, while her technical analysis provided crucial insights into sophisticated cybercrime techniques that were being deployed against teenage targets. The community response was swift and decisive as parents realized that their children had been targeted by criminal harassment that went far beyond normal teenage conflict. The revelation that deepfake technology was being used to create false evidence against high school students created widespread concern about the escalation of cyberbullying into serious criminal territory. Noah Bellamy provided crucial testimony about the Glass Crown's internal operations, while Zara Kingsley's documentation of harassment techniques helped investigators understand the scope of activities that had been disguised as normal social dynamics. Their cooperation with law enforcement demonstrated that the reform movement had evolved beyond school politics into serious engagement with criminal justice systems. Dr. Martinez and Coach Ramirez testified about the sophisticated nature of academic fraud attempts, while Mrs. Denby provided analysis of written communications that revealed coordination and premeditation. The faculty testimony painted a picture of systematic criminal activity that had been operating under the cover of elite teenage social competition. The criminal charges were comprehensive, including cyberstalking, harassment, conspiracy to distribute false information, and federal cybercrime violations that carried potential jail time rather than simple disciplinary consequences. Brielle Carter faced the possibility of permanent criminal records that would affect college admissions, employment opportunities, and professional licensing throughout her adult life. Maddox Grant's technical expertise became evidence against him as prosecutors demonstrated that his sophisticated knowledge of digital manipulation proved criminal intent. Rather than youthful experimentation, his archive of harassment campaigns against multiple victims created a pattern that suggested predatory behavior rather than isolated incidents of poor judgment. The civil litigation that followed created additional consequences, as families of targeted students filed lawsuits seeking damages for psychological harm and reputational damage. The financial exposure extended beyond the immediate perpetrators to include their families and potentially the school district that had failed to protect students from systematic abuse. Avery's transformation from victim to catalyst for systematic reform attracted national attention, as her case became symbolic of broader issues around cyberbullying, digital harassment, and the responsibility of institutions to protect vulnerable students from sophisticated persecution campaigns. Her story inspired similar investigations at schools throughout the country, as administrators recognized that traditional anti-bullying approaches were inadequate for addressing coordinated psychological warfare. Her legacy lived not in the defeat of specific enemies, but in the creation of systems that prevented future students from becoming victims, while empowering them to become advocates for others who might face similar challenges. The quiet warrior had taught an entire community that true strength protected rather than dominated, and that lesson would continue reverberating long after she had moved on to face new battles in broad arenas where the skills she had honed at Pine Valley would be tested against even more sophisticated forms of institutional injustice. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.